Yeah, imposter syndrome. It's like my favorite and most hated thing about this journey. But I hope that I've sort of got pretty good at coping with it, if not sort of weaponizing it when I can.
Welcome to the Raw and Real podcast. Are you dreaming of changing your life through opening a business? Or are you curious what obstacles entrepreneurs had to overcome on their journey? Then you're in the right place. My name is Agnes Pillik and I'm your host. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real. Today's guest on the show is Jeremy Liddle. He's a keynote speaker, author, and serial entrepreneur. Currently, he's mainly focused on SCGX, a venture capital and advisory group he co-founded in 2019, which is building an ecosystem to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeremy.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome to have you on. So I thought a nice starting point for our conversation would be your first company that you started building at the age of 19 with your brother, which was a juice bar. And I was wondering what your first expectations of entrepreneurship were, so your imagination, and how then reality looked like.
I don't know that I had that many like real expectations of what it would be like. I kind of just jump into things and try not to overthink it because I think that's a really good way of talking or thinking your way out of doing things like being an entrepreneur. At the time I was 19, so that's 19 years ago now, half my life ago. Wow, okay, this is an interestingly timed conversation. My brother, I was just kind of figuring out what I was going to do. I'd been through a pretty, rough time in my life, and my brother basically said, well, why don't you sort of get your shit together, go study a business degree, and I'm going to open up these juice bars. My brother's 14 years older than me. So he'd been in the retail game for a long time, and he said, if you do that, then you can manage the first one that I'm going to open up as my own store. And so I kind of just jumped into it. I had no idea that, within a week I'd be working 18-hour days, pushing around 200 kilogram trolleys of oranges, trying to juice bloody orange juice for the Christmas rush that was just about to happen in one of the busiest shopping centres in the country. So it was quite a learning curve.
And because you mentioned that you were also quite through a rough period in a life before, so what was going on?
I just, I guess to go back into sort of the why, I didn't have a great deal of confidence growing up for no particular reason, and then found this life of clubbing and just loved it, and all of a sudden had this huge group of friends and was popular and having fun and no responsibilities, so I could do whatever I wanted. And like it often happens, I just went down a pretty dark path, got into trouble, and got a very sharp reality check and kind of a slap in the face, I guess, to get my stuff together. I was in psychological trouble, and then this psychopharmacologist that turned my life around, that then got diagnosed with cancer. He told me that if you want to look back at your life and die a happy man, then you want to be able to tell yourself that you've made every step count, and that really set my life on a new trajectory. And soon after that, through reading a bunch of books, I figured out that the business was the best way that I could make enough money to make a difference in the world at scale. And then when my brother offered me this opportunity, that was sort of the trigger point. I was like, okay, well, here's my first step to getting into business.
And what were the main challenges that you experienced while, working in this business?
I think the first one, I had to recruit a lot of people very quickly, right? So we opened up this store, like I mentioned, one of the busiest malls in the country at the time, selling $1 fruit juice. So we had to go from 0 to about 15 employees straight away. I was very young at the time. I hadn't done anything like this before. Like, I'd managed a few people in hospitality, but nothing like this. And then we just made the genius move, good in retrospect, but of opening up during the Boxing Day sales here, like the week before Christmas, which is the busiest period in the year. And so we just got pumped. Like I didn't sleep for a month or barely. I'd be juicing, literally like chopping up carrots or loading oranges into a juicing machine at like until 3 o'clock in the morning, and then going back at 7 o'clock the next morning to open up the store and try and make sure that we had enough stock on the shelves. So I don't think I've ever worked quite that hard in my life. And had the responsibility of managing this store for my brother, so I didn't want to screw it up. I wanted to do a good job. So I learned a lot about managing people. I learned a lot about like retail merchandising and stock, and I was doing the rostering, so I was sort of thinking about profit and loss and cash flow and making sure that the business was, not just selling stuff for the sake of it, but actually making a profitable entity, which it was, and it was a cracking store, really good success. So there was many lessons.
And after 5 years, you switched to a new business. So what was the thing that triggered you to start something new?
Yeah, well, I got through the juice bars. So we did 3 in Australia, and my brother gave me the opportunity to go up to Singapore when I was 21 and run the master franchise up there. I did that for about a year and a half, which was, losing $25,000 a month when I got there, and I sort of managed to rope it back into $5,000 a month. So that was kind of a win. But I was never going to get it any better than that, unfortunately, for a whole range of reasons. So a mate of mine walked into my office in Singapore, and he had been chatting with another guy that we went to school with, and they'd sort of discovered these purple berries called acai berries. And they had done really well through juice bars in California. So they kind of got together and said, well, let's grab Jeremy and start a business in Australia. And so that's what they did. They kind of pitched me. I was like, this is nuts. I can't even spell or pronounce this word, let alone figure out how to sell them. But the industry operated on this triple bottom line principle, people, planet, and profit. And so it was my first opportunity to go into a real sustainable and a really great business that could do good things for the people in the Amazon where the berries were from, as well as for the Amazon in general, because it was a Greenpeace endorsed industry. And then we started a charity and put 1% of our revenue into a charity for the people back there. So it was pretty incredible opportunity, which is kind of what swayed me in the end. Plus, it's a great product and very healthy and tastes delicious.
And that was really successful. You managed to go within 3 years from 50K to 1 million in revenue. So
I was thinking about the numbers actually again recently. Yeah, so the first 3 years were like horrible and incredibly difficult. We had an early wave of success selling into cafes, so we got into like about 100 cafes and juice bars, and that was okay, but we weren't making money. Like we were selling lots of stuff, but we couldn't quite crack how to scale up and be profitable. And then we flipped the business into supplements, and that's when it went really well. So we started importing freeze-dried powder, and we made the first acai powder on the market, the first capsules, and like fruit bars and a few other health products, and that went really well. So, we kind of struggled for 3 years, and then all of a sudden went from like 50K 1 year and up to a couple of 100,000, up to 1.2, and then up at our peak 2.4 million in revenue. So sort of 300-ish% growth year on year for 3.5 years. So we won a bunch of awards, and it went well. It went well.
And how did you personally experience the growth of the company?
It's hard. Yeah, it creates a whole different range of problems. Like we never raised capital. And so when you're buying and selling physical goods, products, that's hard. And so we kind of had to scrape money together. We had to work with suppliers and our customers to get good payment terms. We borrowed money off the bank at one point. Often had all of our credit cards leveraged to the hilt. Like it was just like the cash, the management of the cash flow was incredibly stressful. Good problem to have, but still a problem. Because a lot of companies go out of business by growing too fast, and we were definitely on the wire all the way through.
Yeah.
And then I think the other big learning was the staff. Like we went from just me in an office by myself for a while, for a few years, to then having 14 staff and managing distributors with about 50 salespeople all over the country, and having to train and sort of keep tabs on them and help them to be great at selling the product through all the pharmacies and health food stores. So there's some big learnings in both of those experiences.
Can you share some of the learnings, especially when it comes to staff management?
Yeah. Okay. So staff, like there's a really common cliche, like hire slow and fire fast. And, I was conscious of that when we were going through, and I think we did a good job of hiring the right people that were really passionate and really hungry and bought into the values of the company. Like it was really about finding the people that wanted to be there because they loved what we stood for, as opposed to just wanted to sell a product and make money and have a job. So we put some pretty successful screening criteria in with all the staff that we recruited, and had a process where everyone would interview everybody, and we'd get consensus and make sure that we brought the right people on. So that works well. I think one thing that we didn't do well was like systems and processes. Like it's not really my thing. I'm not like I can do it, and I've like had to learn how to do that over the years, but I'm definitely not passionate about it. So I learned a lot about the need to have people with different personality profiles in a company, and I'm the if you're familiar with DISC, I'm the high DI, like the atypical crazy entrepreneur. I'm not the kind of person that likes to sit in the office and fill out spreadsheets and write procedures and have everything perfectly systematic, and you need those people in your business. So and we did have one, but I was always just really focused on and excited about growth, and so that's what I put almost all of my energy into, and then sort of had to learn in retrospect when things started breaking and blowing up and mistakes were being made that those procedures were super important. So we brought business coaches in to help us get all that stuff in place, and that saved the end from being a lot worse than it could have been. It could have been pretty ugly towards the end, and we managed to kind of keep things under control fairly.
And last time we talked, you mentioned that all the big breakthroughs you had in your life happened when you were the most scared and out of your depth. So can you tell us about one of these situations and how it impacted your life?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. It's like my favorite and most hated thing about this journey. But I hope that I've sort of got pretty good at coping with it, if not sort of weaponizing it when I can. And yeah, all the greatest things that I've achieved have been when I've been completely out of my depth and doing things that I really have absolutely no business doing. After RioLife, with the G20, I think is the best example of that. And then getting into funds management later as well. Like I really had no business being a venture capitalist, but I just figured it out and got the people involved to do it. But the G20 is the best example like that. I had been writing a book and it was just about to publish it, and it was about 6 months out of RioLife, and someone sent me a text message about this G20 for young entrepreneurs, which is an alliance of the representative bodies for youth entrepreneurship in the G20 countries, and so Australia had a group that were doing it, and they weren't doing an amazing job, and so I sort of looked it up and then messaged the people here and overseas, and it was the ones from overseas that got back to me, and basically on a call within a week, they said, "Hey, do you reckon you can get 20 entrepreneurs to Mexico in 3.5 weeks? Can you bring the Aussie delegation, because the guys there aren't super engaged?" And I just immediately said yes, completely naively. But that's as I said, where I often operate the best. And so we did, got the only gender balanced delegation there. Got 20 people, which was more than most of the other delegations. And, we were kind of like heroes because all of a sudden Australia showed up to this thing where we'd never been super engaged. And then I think the moment where I felt like I was completely out of my depth was sitting in the leadership meeting with all of the presidents and Sherpas for every country.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, let's go around the room. And it was in one of those like horseshoe rooms that you've probably seen in pictures of the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's felt really prestigious and pretty amazing. And so they go around the horseshoe and then they get to me and like all these people that run these massive organizations for hundreds of thousands or millions of young entrepreneurs in their countries. And then there's me, this Aussie guy that, had a bit of success running a company sometime. Like I just completely out of my depth. But lo and behold, we had the Aussie Summit coming up in 2 years, and all the leaders were sort of really crying out for someone to come in that could just jump in and get the job done and show some leadership. So from being completely out of my depth, then I got offered the position of president and went on to host one of the best summits that the G20 ever saw. So it was kind of just fell into it and made it work.
And before you mentioned that you are also experiencing imposter syndrome, can you tell us a little bit more, like how, in which situations that is especially strong, and also how you weaponize it by now?
Yeah, so I think if you want to achieve something really great, you've got to push your boundaries, right? Like, and this is written and spoken about a lot with entrepreneurship. The people that achieve great things do things that are completely beyond what any normal person would think is possible, and probably even that person thinks is possible. But what I've always done, and it was the same with getting the opportunity in Singapore when I was 21, like I just kind of jump in and figure it out and make a bunch of mistakes. And of course that's going to happen, but try not to make them too badly and learn from them and not make them again. And so I actually get quite excited when I'm really freaked out by something that I'm considering doing, because I know that it's, going to be big, or at least has the potential to be big, assuming that's, completely screw it up. But the operating in that place is where I work the hardest and make sure that I do the best that I can. And so I love that feeling. And that's sort of what I say when I've weaponized it. Like I know that I'm doing what I should be doing when I feel like I'm completely out of my depth. And I just work as hard as I can.
And because you mentioned that you're pushing yourself, obviously, so I guess there are also a lot of moments where you're confronted with new things and you don't really know how to tackle them. How do you get then the help to figure it out, or where do you get help?
This is where I often say that I just love being the dumbest person in the room or in a conversation. It's the best place to be, because I just make sure that I get really, really smart people. Like if I had to say that I have any kind of superpower, it's being able to get to the position where I'm above average at a lot of things that are really complex quite quickly, but I'm never the expert. I will never be the best at anything, and I don't expect to be. I find the people that are, and I just try and work with them, and I try and make friends with them and convince them to come and do stuff with me. It's been the same all the way through. I had really great mentors through the G20 YA experience. I had really great advisory board and investment committee in my investment firm, that CapitalPitch, and same with what I'm doing now. I think you have to be bold and just be willing to reach out to ridiculous people. I was trying to get Helen Clark, who I did work with at the G20, to join SDGX, and she hasn't said yes yet, but I'm not going to give up. I'll keep asking her for 5 years. She might never say yes, but I'll just keep trying, and maybe we'll get it one day. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll find someone as good or better elsewhere. But that's sort of my algorithm, I guess, or my thought process behind it is just always be the dumbest person in the room.
And as you say, you have to be bold and just reach out to people. How do you make them enthusiastic about what you're doing or convince them to jump on board?
You've got to be pretty thoughtful about why, like what's in it for them, and be. It should always align to their values or what they are trying to achieve with their life. Like, don't just reach out randomly to people. Like, I'll do a fair bit of research and make sure that, like, I know that Helen Clark, because I worked with her before with the G20 with the white paper that we wrote. Like, I know she's interested in this stuff. She sits on an advisory board for another VC fund, which is managed, which is some Scandinavian money. I know she's passionate about climate and entrepreneurship. Like, so I know that what we're doing aligns to what she's trying to do with her life. She's far too busy to do it, and it's a long shot. But same with everybody else. It's really just knowing that what you're going to put in front of them is something that they're probably going to be interested in, as opposed to just going in there selfishly and thinking, this is what I need or I want, and you're the person that can help me do it.
Yeah. And during a talk, you also mentioned the quote, only those who will risk going too far will find out how far one can go. So what do you think is the best way to learn to take risks and implement the mindset of being okay with failure?
Yeah, it's super hard, hey? Like, you got to be willing to have people, look poorly on what you've done, and you've got to be willing to disappoint people and disappoint yourself, and to like setting unrealistic expectations, similar to what I was saying before around that entrepreneurial psychology. It's kind of necessary for if that's your personality type, and it's not everyone's personality type. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs that do sit on the opposite end of the personality spectrum, that are the operators. One analogy that's used for that is the visionary entrepreneurs versus the integrators. And all great visionary entrepreneurs like Walt Disney had his brother who was the integrator, and Walt was never the operator. Like, he wasn't good at running the company. He was good at envisioning what the company could be and then putting all of the crazy pieces of the puzzle in place. So you need, for me, I've just always tried to sort of stick to my guns on what I'm good at and find people to plug the holes of things that I'm not good at.
And how did you, for yourself, overcome the fear of failure?
I haven't. I haven't, and I think and nor should you. I don't think. Like, if something doesn't genuinely scare you, then it's either not big and scary enough, or you're a sociopath. Like, in reality, like I think I don't want to overcome it. I just want to be able to sort of work through it.
And do you have some tips on how to best work through it? Because I think a lot of people have certain ideas or something, but in the end they don't act on it, and there are so many excuses because it's just like so hard to overcome it.
Yeah. I guess my baby steps. Just do something. And you don't have to do everything. You don't have to bite off the entire thing. You don't have to change the entire course of your life when you make this decision. Like, don't quit your job and give up all of your income. There's Originals is a really good book about that, where the greatest entrepreneurs are actually been the greatest risk mitigators. They had their college degree, they had a job, they had backup plans, they had all of the other, and then so when they had their life in a position that was actually very secure, that enabled them to take the huge risks. And I think that's super important. It's not something that I've been good at. I wish I'd read that book when I was 18 and not like when I was, I think, 30 when I finally read that book. So yeah, being able to take risks, I think if you can come at it from a very secure place, financially, psychologically, with your family, that really helps. And then the other thing for me has been that I've learned, again, really only in the last sort of 8-ish years, is to just look after myself, to get enough sleep, to stay fit, to try and eat healthily, try not to drink too much, or at least, keep that for weekends when I don't need my brain as much. If when I'm in a really good place physically and mentally is when I'm able to deal with the failure and the risk and the emotional roller coaster that is the inevitable journey.
And as you also mentioned, the emotional roller coaster. So looking at your entrepreneurial career, was there really like a moment that sticks out where you hit rock bottom?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I probably wouldn't. I used to use that word rock bottom or that term, and I think like I've had a pretty a pretty privileged upbringing. I'm in Australia. My family's done okay. Like we're not millionaires, and there's no family office or anything, so I didn't have like the silver spoon. But by some respects, I did. Like it has never been that bad. There's always been sort of a bit of a safety net. I've always been able to, when I was at sort of what I thought at the time was rock bottom. Like it, I've never been destitute. Having said all that, and then I think been another learning more recently. Like some people's rock bottom is very different to others, and everything's relative. So like I was never
Totally.
living on the street. Yeah, and so that is an interesting psychology to bring into like when you experience hardship, because it's not really that hard. Like you're probably okay, and if you're not, then then you probably need to work on trying to find some sort of safety net or getting whatever help you need at that time. So it's not to take away from people that do hit that, but I guess for me, to answer your question, like when was the worst time? Probably paradoxically, when I was running the G20, it was a charity, right? So I didn't really earn much, if any, income for the first 2 years.
Hmm.
And so, and when we were hosting the summit here, I had to shut down all of the programs that the nonprofit was doing because we just had to throw all of our very limited resources at pulling off this summit. So we had to build this basically $1 million business out of nothing, with no government support, no funding from anyone, no existing sponsors, and no staff and nothing. So it was kind of just me and a couple of helpers that had to put on a sort of an event that had cost between $1 and $3 million in other countries, and so that was so hard. And I was struggling to pay my rent at the time, because I hadn't had a big exit out of any of my previous companies. I had a bit of money, and I burnt most of it sort of running around the world doing all this work. So that was one of the hardest times. Like I would get flown to like Saudi Arabia as a VIP speaker to talk about all this amazing work at the G20, and then come back and like have to borrow money off my parents to like buy food and stuff at one point. Like that was so ridiculous and such a mind bending paradox. It was weird. So at the end of it all, like I, pulled this summit off, and it was amazing, and just threw everything at it. And, we did deals all over the place to make it all work. And I was quite excited about getting back into the commercial world and starting a company again at that point.
Yeah.
So like the year leading up to that summit was definitely the hardest year of my life, I'd say. But at the same time, like I said before, a pretty privileged position to be in, doing amazing work. So it was incredible experience at the same time.
And you worked at the G20 for around 5 years. So, what were your main learnings that you took away from promoting entrepreneurship?
Yeah, like when we started, the word entrepreneur was not used in any single G20 policy document anywhere by any of the support organizations, like the Business 20, the Youth 20. So it's sort of like when I started anyway, so 2012. And in the lead up to Australia, it was starting to get into the Leaders Declaration every year. After Australia, we did a pretty good job. We got it in. We got the words young entrepreneurs into the Leaders Declaration for the first time. And then in Turkey and China the year after, like fintech became a really big thing. Like, so it wasn't all us. We were part of a big machine that made all that happen. But what I wanted to do when I got into the G20 was pull one of the biggest levers in the world, which is the peak of government policy globally, really. There's lots of other bodies, but the G20 controlling 85% of the world's GDP, like that's a if they agree on something, then the world tends to also agree on it. And so we got entrepreneurship as a priority through the G20 countries and through the UN system, because I had brought the UN to the Australian summit as well. So we actually managed to kind of tug on that lever a little bit and create some real change.
And recently you switched to being an investor, as you mentioned already before. So what were your main struggles that you were experiencing because of the switch?
Well, so when I went to start CapitalPitch, I didn't have much money. I'd come off all this time as running nonprofits. I had great experience, but didn't have any investment, like startup investment experience. Like I invested in stocks and things, but that's very different to investing in startups. But I had advised hundreds and hundreds of companies and worked on building companies. So I had the operators experience, which is equally as important as the investment banking or investment experience that a lot of VCs start with when they go into the industry for the first time. So I guess the challenge was trying to convince, first of all, figure out what the hell we were doing. We started by building a platform to connect entrepreneurs to investors, and then we started advising deals and raising capital, and then we set our sights on raising a fund and did that. But convincing Australian capital markets that are very conservative, pretty similar to the UK, but arguably behind in venture capital, behind the US and UK, most of the major successful ecosystems. So convincing conservative Australian investors that a young, what was I, 32-ish at the time, 31, that they could trust me with their money was hard. So we had to get all the grey-haired guys around on the investment committee and, the family office that had the credibility, and the my co-founder was a finance expert, and just, it was like this, putting this puzzle together. And so I was getting all the little pieces together to have people trust us with their money, and they did in the end. So we got there, but yeah, it's hard work.
And how did you manage to gain their trust?
Time and effort, and by basically over the course of, so it was 3 years in when we raised our first fund, it was listening to every single negative, like every no that we got to people giving us money, and either finding or building the answer to that, so that when people eventually, as much as we could, we had an operationalized answer to every potential negative or any reason that an investor wouldn't give us money. And that doesn't mean that people gave us money. We that everyone did. I would have pitched 400 investors to get the 40 that we finally got to invest in our fund. But it was just putting the infrastructure together and proving that we could make good investments. So finding great startups and getting the opportunity to invest in them.
And on average, how long did it take you from the first contact until you would get the money? How long did you need to have the relationship with someone?
If we were going in cold, probably about 6 months.
Okay.
Like ideally, you wouldn't try to raise money from investors for a first time fund that you haven't already known for years. Like that's the ideal situation to be in. And ideally, they've invested with you before, and you've put them into deals where they've made money. Then you've got a decent shot of getting a fund away. If you're starting from scratch, it can take 1 to 2 years in a lot of cases.
Wow.
And it's kind of like this domino effect. Like just getting the first person in, or the anchor investor, is so hard. But if you get the right one, and they've got a network, and their network will trust them, And then that network has networks. So you get sort of like these concentric circles of trust. And that's ultimately how we did it. We sort of got the first one, and then we got another 3 or 4, and they brought in others. And at least by either association or explicit endorsement, then we managed to just corral more and more people.
And as you are currently an investor, so what do you see are the most common reasons why companies are failing?
Why companies are failing? Well, if
Or
you'd
people are
asked me,
giving up?
if you'd asked me a month ago,
Yeah.
prior to all of this COVID-19 madness, I would say, anecdotally from my experience, that the number one reason, probably equally, I'd say 2 reasons. One, people aren't trying to solve a big enough problem a lot of the time. Like, people come up with great ideas, but great ideas don't build global companies necessarily. You need a lot. You need a lot more than that. And I'd say that solving a massive problem that's really painful, and hopefully meaningful and purposeful, and that is actually going to make the world a better place. And I'd tie that with the team, and that's a very generic answer, but it's like, if you're going to build a tech company, you need a tech founder, and if you don't have a tech founder, then it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. And so in Australia, there's a lot of business people that go and start tech companies with really no idea about technology, or at least a very superficial idea. And then, assuming you can get that sort of co-founder dynamic right, then you need the rest of the personality dynamic, as well as the ability to actually work together for 10 years, which is super hard. So I think it's the combination of those two that I saw most of the companies blow up for one or both of those reasons.
And as you mentioned, the current COVID-19 situation, are you still investing in companies at the moment?
Yeah, with SDGX, we, like you said, we only started in 2019, and so we're out raising our first fund right now, and thankfully it's just a small fund, just to prove out this climate technology investment thesis, because that's what we're focusing on. So it's energy, mobility, transport, and production, and sort of the intersection of those technologies. And it's a pretty new concept. It'll be the first fund of its kind in this part of the world. So again, just trying to do something super easy. No, so trying to do something that hasn't been done before. So it's going to take time, and so it'll take us a year probably to raise our first little fund and do the first 5 to 10 investments, and then we'll go out for the big fund. But I guess in this environment, where we're not doing a climate technology fund, then you'd be looking at medical companies right now. Like, there's medical companies that are coming up with solutions to this thing that are doing really well, in all sorts of different ways. We've seen from companies that have sort of pivoted to work on treatments and vaccines, to hardware suppliers. Obviously there's people of interesting. Something I never thought I'd see actually is gin distilleries making hand sanitizer. Yeah, that's what a lot of the gin distilleries here have pivoted to, because all of their infrastructure is set up to do that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily means I'm going to be investing in gin distilleries, but
Yeah.
no. But I think the big thing for us is moving forward is deep technology. There's a lot of apps, there's a lot of marketplaces, there's a lot of there's great companies that have done that stuff, but considering we want to invest in companies that solve the Sustainable Development Goals, hence the acronym that we chose, SDGX, for the name of the company. And we want companies that can do that at scale and globally, and do it with really revolutionary innovation. So deep technologies is the sector that we're super interested in. So this is companies that are based on real scientific or engineering innovation, and something that's a massive step change that will completely create new markets or completely revolutionize industries. So that's sort of our main thematic.
And I read in one of your older blog posts that valuing yourself is one of the least talked about issues in entrepreneurship. So,
Hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about your experiences related to that?
Yeah, you've done your research. That's an old one. Valuing yourself. Yeah, so I guess that's my recent take on that would go back to what I was talking about before around just keeping yourself healthy, um, but also keeping your lifestyle and your relationships healthy as well. I sacrificed a lot over the years, and everyone does, and I think that's a rite of passage. Like if you're going to be truly committed to doing something really hard, which all companies are, but some more than others, depending on the size of the problem that you're going after, then it's a rite of passage to make some sacrifices, but not forever, and not at the cost of burnout, which happens to a lot of people. And so getting your sleep, looking after yourself, keeping your lifestyle somewhat balanced, as balanced as any entrepreneurial lifestyle can be, is super important, and that's all about valuing yourself.
And do you have some tips from an entrepreneurial perspective when you go into a deal with a VC, how you should value yourself?
Yeah, well, the best companies to invest in, you have to fight to get into as an investor. So the really good entrepreneurs don't need your money. Money's a commodity, because they're building something so amazing that the investors would be lucky to get an allocation into, and be lucky to sort of get in and help that entrepreneur. So the first thing when it comes as an entrepreneur to valuing yourself is to make sure that you're building something that great,
Mm.
and for you to have confidence and the business and the technology or whatever the product or service, although services typically don't need to raise money, but the product that an investor would be lucky to get into, authentically, not arrogantly, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs that go out there with a lot of arrogance and entitlement, and investors can see straight through that. But to authentically, with sort of as little ego as possible, just build something incredible, and not be desperate for money. And if you can do that, then you're in a really good spot.
And because you also mentioned confidence, and you've been also struggling at some point in your life with that. Do you have some
Yep.
tips how to, also if you don't feel confident on the inside, to show that for the outside world?
Oh, look, I think it's okay not to be to have fear, and to at the same time, like again, it's that imposter syndrome, right? Like if you're building something really incredible, then and you believe that you have the ability to do that, then you're going to have a level of confidence with that. But you're definitely not going to have all of the answers and know exactly how to do it. So it's equally as important in a meeting with an investor to be authentic and be honest and open about that stuff, and just say, look, these are all the things that I've figured out, and this is how we're going to build this company, but I don't know everything, and I need people that can help me. That's typically what the great entrepreneurs are looking for. They're not looking for money; they're looking for help, and they kind of know the gaps, and they know where they need help, and what it's going to take in some way or another to get to what their vision is. And the vision might only be for the problem being solved, like the strategy, the tactics, the journey to get there is almost impossible to figure out. So the entrepreneurs that can go into an investor meeting and say, these are all the things that I think I figured out, and these are the things that I haven't, and I need people to help me, like that's a really great conversation to have.
Perfect. Do you still have a last key takeaway, a personal insight that you would like to share and that helped you grow?
Uh, Last takeaway. I think I'd go back to that solving a big problem, right? Like I think that it's not starting a company is not something that you should do on a whim. It's not something that you should do if you're chasing money, because money's often the last thing to come. You should only do it if you really, in your bones, feel like you're the best person on the planet to solve a problem, or that you're the best. And even if you're not the most capable right now, because you may not know everything that you're going to put the work in and do more than anyone else would to solve that problem. And it's about solving the problem, not about coming up with a great idea. And if that's the sort of the place that someone can start a company from, then they're in a much better spot than most.
And how can people contact you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest one. I'm pretty available on LinkedIn. So just you can Jeremy Liddle, Liddle. I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm responsive to as many people as I can be on there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing today. And for everyone who's watching or listening, if you could find any value in today's conversation, then make sure to share it on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, so we can see what your favorite takeaways were.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me.